you for taking time to join us this morning. We are going to talk about the Excelsior program, which has been around for a full year now, so we can actually say this is a little bit of a year in review, except that there's still a lot of unanswered questions about the program. So I'm going to take you through where we've been and a little bit of where we're going and kind of how everything transpired this last year. I'm not sure how much you have all been involved in the implementation of the Excelsior program, but for some people it became a huge part of what they did really beginning probably right around the end of May last year and right up until yesterday. No, I mean, it's ongoing. So we're definitely looking at where this program has been and kind of where we want it to go. Hi, welcome. So I wanted to just, if I may, just take you back a little bit to where we sort of all started. And as I said, this has been a year for this program. It was passed into law in April of 2017. I think when this happened, we were all sort of taken aback. There's certainly on the national level was quite a bit of discussion about free college and free tuition and what that meant. And other states had implemented certain aspects of this, concept of free college or free tuition. So we weren't exactly sure what was going on. There were a lot of political pieces to the puzzle that were kind of falling into place at that time in April and right before. But I will never forget the weekend that it was passed. It was my son's birthday, and we were celebrating, and I started getting emails, and I thought, that's weird, The budget was just a little tiny bit late, and the next thing we knew, we had an Excelsior program. So we hit the ground running on Monday morning. It was really something, and I can't believe it's actually been a year. From the time that the program was passed, we had a very, very short time frame to move everything forward and to make it a reality. So one of the things that I'd like to kind of discuss a little bit as we go through the program this morning is to tell you a little bit about how the collaboration unfolded between all of the partners and moving the program into becoming a reality for our students with this really, really tight time frame. So as we moved forward, I think the first few weeks it was really just kind of running around trying to get the right people in the room to talk about what it would look like and to decide really how to advocate or how to, review the statute, which was a very small, it really was about 2.5 pages, depending on the font of what sometimes statute is like pages and pages on these programs, so you know really what you're dealing with going into it. We knew that based on the fact that it was a very limited amount of legislation and written language, that what we would be doing is we would be spending a lot of time talking about regulation and policy and procedure. So what that meant was we had to be a very active partner. I would have to say SUNY jumped right in. Monday morning, after the legislation was passed, we had a meeting with all the college presidents, and everybody was sort of at that point, what does this mean? Where are we going with this? What is the impact? And we were doing a lot of fact-finding. But what we wanted to make sure was that right away we were mobilized as a system, because what we knew based on the information that was included in the statute is that SUNY would be probably the greatest population of Excelsior students. At that time, we sort of knew that. I mean, certainly it was for public university students, but given the size, we knew we would have the lion's share, and that has stayed true. So as we've moved through the program, the good news about that means that we have a strong voice about the program, and at the same time, the stakes are very high for us also, right? So immediately college presidents recognized that. We formed groups to start looking at that, and some teams that spent a considerable amount of time making recommendations on the regulations. The organization that is actually the main administrator of the program is the Higher Ed Services Corporation, which I know most of you are familiar with. The Higher Ed Services Corporation is the financial aid agency in New York State. And they administer the TAP program and other scholarships in New York State. And at one time, they were the guarantee agency for student loans. So the agency immediately went into an interpretation mode, and we started meeting with them. The Board of Trustees of the Higher Ed Services Corporation passed emergency regs at the end of May of that year. So we had about a 5-week time period where we had a lot of conversations. Some things came to pass that we discussed, some things didn't, as these things often go. And because we were given such a short time frame, we really had to move it forward. So the Board of Trustees met, and the Chancellor actually she is a part of that board, and I represent her on that board. And it was a very interesting conversation about this and how this program would move forward. One of the reasons why it was so crucial was because what we knew was that so much was uncharted. So HESC was administering the program, and the New York State Office for Technology, and I know you all know ITS, you can probably work with folks at ITS, they were a very big part of this also for the data transfer pieces. So between those partners and us, it was a lot, and the expectation at that time was that we would make awards for the fall of 2017. So again, we're talking about a handful of weeks. So we started from there. And again, unprecedented. I mean, I can tell you, I've been in financial aid for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this on the state side, on the federal side. Generally what you see with programs like this, especially when you look at a program that has the potential to be as large as Excelsior has, what you would normally see is maybe a year to move it forward. You know, that's pretty typical. And often when legislation is passed, they might say, beginning with students, like first-time students in fall of 2017, right? And we would all agree that that's reasonable, right? We would say, okay, we need a year, we need to have meetings and discussions, and we need to map this out. We had none of that. And so I think what happened in this unprecedented time frame, which was extremely narrow, was pretty amazing. And I will give throughout the day and wherever I go, I always give the greatest pat on the back to our campuses, because there was no way this was going to happen without complete cooperation from campuses. So I will go through more what that looked like. We had an Excelsior committee established immediately. And I'm not sure if any of you were involved in that, but one of the things that was really important to us from system administration was to make sure that we didn't have just one group represented on that team. So we had to have everybody. So we needed college presidents, financial aid people, registrars, IT folks, IR. We had all kinds of representatives, and from all sectors, and that was very important as well. We certainly knew that there would be different community college issues, and state ops would have, special concerns. So those were all the folks that we identified to just get together to toss things back and forth. I think that was crucial to the effort, and I know that HESC appreciated the feedback, and they continue to appreciate the feedback that we provide to them about what it is that our campuses want and need. Doesn't mean we get everything. It does mean that we are listened to and we have a voice, we have a place at the table, and that was very, very important to us. So when I mentioned the time frame and how short it was, and how often with new programs you're given a date that's new students from this date forward. This program was unique in that anybody who was already in the process of working towards their degree, were going to be included in this program. So frankly, it would have been easier if that wasn't the case. But the good news about this program was that it was really an effort, again, to say we want to help students complete and we want to move them through the program. So we're not going to, out of the gate, ignore the students who have already been working towards their degree and doing so successfully. One of the things that with this, though, was that it added this incredible level of complexity. And I think in an effort to move it forward swiftly, some decisions were made about data that needed to be gathered from the campuses that caused us to have great challenges over the summer. And really, the big challenge there was not these general requirements, which I think probably most of you are pretty familiar with. It related more to where they were in their academic program based on the year that they started college. So in other words, your new students were the easiest because out of the gate, you've got a kid maybe coming in from high school or a non-traditional student who's joining you who went to high school several years ago, they have almost like a fresh, they're starting fresh. It's a slate that's clean. So our returning students, as well as students who are transferring between campuses, were the ones that caused us the most challenge, because what we had to do was to look back. So these general requirements were pretty straightforward. And one of the things that was definitely a big, I guess, discussion item with this program was the assumption that a student should be getting out of school and earning a degree within a 2-year time period if you're working on an associate's degree, or a 4-year time frame for a 4-year degree now, or a bachelor's degree. So we know that isn't always the case with our students, and certainly this was, it's a concept that's not new, but it is a little bit of a departure from what we were dealing with our students moving forward. We actually have campuses who recommend their first semester full-time students take 12 credits, for example. And then certain populations of students, maybe students who are taking remedial courses, or those students are also not always it's not always recommended that you take 15 credits your first semester. That's a tough semester. So depending on where you are in the at-risk, kind of world or spectrum, you might have normally been set, somebody might say, what, why don't you take 12 credits? Well, this program requires 15 credits, and it's making this assumption that every student is going to be moving through their program, 15 credits each semester. One of the critical pieces for us was that that's not always the case for our students. And while I think sometimes, there's this thought that taking 5 years to get a bachelor's degree means you're, you've got to work a little harder, we know the truth on that, right? That there are just some students that are not going to be moving forward at that same pace. What we were very happy about, though, is that we did make some inroads on this whole discussion about how many credits. And while it complicates the program a little bit more, it offers a little bit more of an opportunity for our students to space out the earning of the credits. So we were able to maintain that students do have to, they have to be taking at least 12 credits per semester to meet the full-time requirement. However, if a student doesn't earn 15 each semester in your typical academic fall, spring, there is an opportunity for them to continue to take classes maybe during a winter break, or online over the summer, or in person over the summer. So what we're looking at is a situation where a student has a 365-day period to earn the 30 that are required by the program for 1 year. So my year could start in the spring, and another student's year starts in the fall. So I start the clock from the day that I begin. That did not exactly work for our prior students. So our students who are already in the pipeline, there are some issues associated with that and the tracking of those credits, and we'll get into a little bit more about that. But I wanted to mention to you too that with this program, it's not an entitlement program like the tuition assistance program is, right? It's a scholarship, which means not everybody's going to get it, right? There's winners and losers. That's a tough one for us, right? It's a tough one. I'm a financial aid person, so it's a tough for me to think, gosh, I hate to see that this student is not eligible because they missed the deadline or whatever, However, I think it's important to keep it in mind, This is not going to necessarily be a program for everybody. Again, little tough for us to take, and I think sometimes some of the marketing that might have been associated with, or the narrative that was kind of out on the street, didn't always follow along with that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times that was not in our control, and our campuses ended up being the ones who had to clean up some of that, where the messaging might have been free college rather than free tuition. Again, no malicious intent, just sometimes that happened, and then we found that by the time the student got to the campus was the one trying to unravel this for our parents and students. So it really complicated, I think, things for everyone, which is why, again, I will say the effort at the campus level was amazing, and not just one office. It was everybody. Everybody was mobilized on this. So You've probably also, you're aware of a lot of these, the calculation. One of the things is that Excelsior is last dollar. And this was another thing that's a very difficult thing to explain to folks who got the message that it was free college rather than free tuition, right? And very difficult to explain to someone who was getting TAP and getting Pell. These are other, federal and state programs, and they're getting funded through them, that to then say you're not getting Excelsior on top of that, you're getting Excelsior after that. That was really rough for folks. So I think that, again, it was a lot of the messaging. It's not unusual to have these challenges in a first year. It's just, again, it was all thrown at everybody in such a short time period that it was very different. We didn't have 6 months lead time to everybody get together and start talking about their messaging, and just say, okay, what are we going to tell everybody? And what kind of materials can we produce? And at the same time, there were meetings at campuses that were taking place with folks from the Cuomo administration who were trying to help and, bring this information to people at all campuses across the state. And it was a really positive thing. And at the same time, it got people excited. There was confusion, as these things go, right? So what we can tell you about this is one of the areas that really caused a lot of confusion. And frankly, this is where the campuses really stepped in. And with this whole last dollar, we still struggle with explaining that. And we are always working to advocate to make sure that campuses know and are aware of which programs have to be considered prior to being able to add an Excelsior word and what happens afterwards. And as you know, this all has to take place at the campus. The financial aid office has to do this because nobody else has that information. We certainly don't have it at System, but the Higher Ed Services Corporation does not have it either. They don't know what the student's financial aid looks like. So this program is based on family income or the student income, depending on who the student is. It doesn't have the same calculations as other programs like the TAP program. Takes into consideration your entire family, right? So you would get maybe more of an award because you have more children in college, et cetera. This program is just straight on income. It's another thing that we've heard complaints about. Certainly, it is what it is. The other thing that is another sticking point, I think, and when we're trying to explain it, is that tuition is frozen at the 2016-17 rate for Excelsior recipients. So what happens here is you have a situation where a student who's receiving a scholarship is actually paying less tuition than a student who is a non-recipient. And that's very much a departure from what we're accustomed to at SUNY. We're certainly accustomed to a student who's at a state ops versus a community college paying tuition, but students sitting side by side in chairs, we're not really, this is a little bit of this throws us a little bit for a loop. And certainly when we're talking about programming for this, it adds all of this complexity. So the Excelsior scholarship also is $5,500 is where you're going to bump into the max. And certainly we have students across the spectrum on that. The way it's shaking out, though, is that there is also this credit that is also going to be provided by the state or reimbursed to the campuses. And that's called an Excelsior tuition credit, similar to what happens with the TAP award. There's also a credit that's assigned to recipients and makes up a certain percentage, depending on their award, percentage towards tuition. I will say, with TAP, SUNY is still paying the tuition credit, whereas with Excelsior, it is expected that the state will fund that as well. So just to kind of give you an idea of how that is shaking out as well. I think most folks know, though, that this, again, is tuition only. So when we start talking about the costs, everybody knows we're just talking about the cost of textbooks, right? And unbelievable. Gone are the days that you could spend, $30 on a textbook. I mean, is that possible anymore? I remember when I was in college 100 years ago, my undergraduate, I remember my parents giving me $200 for books. And that actually took care of it. I mean, that couldn't, nowadays, right, we're just looking at one book, right? Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. So I think this concept of folks really focusing on tuition only is really a mistake. And certainly from my perspective in the financial aid world, I think, gosh, you know, tuition is such a big part of it, but it is not the largest part of what students will encounter as far as their educational costs, particularly for those students who are residential, so our students who live in the dorms and pay for meal plans, et cetera. So the conversations, and I know you've had a lot of these conversations during this conference, it's a mistake for people to focus too much on just tuition. One of the things that's great, though, about this program is that we do think that it is possible that some of our students will be able to replace a student loan with Excelsior, and isn't that what we're all really hoping anyway? But what we also want to make sure is that our campuses are aware that if there are scholarships or programs to fund certain aspects of a cost of attendance for a student, say particular for books or something that's in particular for housing, that those do not have to be considered if they're specific. And again, the language for that, we've gone around and around on that. Certainly the Higher Ed Services Corporation has weighed in and helped us with language for some of our campus foundations and some of our donors. Donors are not always really excited to say that, you know, their private money is going to be, you know, they don't want to replace something that could be coming from public dollars, and certainly we understand that. So we've been mindful of that and tried to really work with our campuses as much as we can where it's appropriate. So one of the things that is something that we're continually working on is the aspects of the program that now that we sort of have a year, we're kind of past it, but not really, because we're still in the final certification realm for our fall awards. And in many ways, we won't know the full extent of everything until that all sort of shakes out. We were having a conversation yesterday about this program, and you can imagine we have many conversations about this program because we don't know exactly how many recipients we have yet. We think it's around 17,000 across the state, and the lion's share of that is at our state-operated campuses. I think we're probably, gosh, I don't know, but we do have overall about 65% of the entire population of Excelsior recipients across the state. So it's pretty significant. On the other hand, if we say it's about 17,000 students, you know, what are the implications there? Was there any impact on enrollment? Probably not likely for this past year, more likely for this coming year. We're still not in a place where we can know exactly what that looks like. What we do know is that applications for admission spiked right around the time that the program was announced. Makes sense, kind of the Excelsior effect. You know, everybody would say, oh, I'm going to go to college for free, right? How that translated, we're not totally where we can know that yet. Unfortunately for, I would say, our community college students who came to college, like, you know, I worked at a community college, so I remember those days when classes started, and it would be, people would walk in off the street and say, I want to register. No prep. You know, they just, hi, I'm here. And you'd say, okay. And I remember like ushering them through, right? We would do it, whatever we could do. We'd, you know, calculate financial aid, give them a book voucher, do whatever we could to get them into class. And that's the mission, right? And that's important. Now, if that student didn't apply for Excelsior because they were like, well, I'll just wait and I'll apply. Or they decided the week before, they'd already missed the deadline. So that is like, oh, you know. So I think those are some of the frustrations that we feel, you know, that like, do we have to have that tight of a deadline? You know, I know it's not an entitlement program, but can we broaden it? We were successful in broadening it a little bit, but I always want more. I want it to be wide open. So we remain hopeful. One of the other things that is a little bit of a disadvantage for our community college population, although it doesn't I mean, not really directly to the student, but just in an overall sense, is that the legislation and the statute actually makes us freeze tuition at that 16, 17 rate for 4 years. So while that might make sense if you're assuming a student starts and goes to college for 4 years, but at a community college, we're also required to freeze it for 4 years. Seems a little unfair. Maybe it should be based on the cohort, like a 2-year. So, I don't know. We have all of these things that we would like to kind of iron out. But this just gives you a little bit of a flavor of some of the things that we've been seeing with regard to how the tuition is charged and where we went from there. Now, I mentioned this before about how we looked at matriculation. And again, it's that 365-day period. So a couple of things about this that made it really challenging is when we did this look back, we had students who were not continuously enrolled, for example. So you have to be, based on the statute, you have to be continuously enrolled in order to have gotten the scholarship if you were already in college. Now, when we're advising students starting today or starting 6 months ago, we would tell them all of these things. Unfortunately, we didn't know. The program wasn't around, so it was very difficult for some students who maybe took a semester off. They started, and then they said, I'm going to take a semester off. Or maybe they had a reason to take time off, but they weren't slacking, right? But unfortunately, some of the students, we weren't able to get them in. So this is, again, where the program isn't for everybody, but hopefully, as we move forward, the more we talk about it and the more we know about it, we're able to advise. And this is another example where the collaboration is huge between campus offices. Gone are the days when anybody can just say, okay, I'm in my lane. I'm financial aid, I don't have to talk to this person. I'm a registrar, I don't have to talk to this person. This is where this program really showed us where everybody intersects and how closely everybody at the campus level working made this move possible, like for any students, because academic advisors had to be part of the discussion to say, well, what did this student do? Are they making progress? Are they taking classes in their program of study? If so, how many? Does it meet the requirement? How many credits did they earn 2 semesters ago? So we really needed to do all of these things to look back. We also needed to know if there were interruptions of study, if they were continuously enrolled. So some of the things we also bumped into that were a little bit, problematic, or maybe just we needed to raise awareness. The summer and winter terms can be used to count towards your credits. However, there is no additional funding for those. So what we saw and what we will continue to see, I think, is the impact of this. So it's all well and good to say you can make those credits up over the summer. The challenge is, do you have money to do that? Do you have the available funds to say, I could only take 12 credits each semester because that's really all I could handle. So that means I have 24 earned credits at the end of the summer. I still need to make up 6 more credits. I don't have any money for tuition. I have to work. So these are the things that we're looking at right now. We knew this was coming, and everybody's been working towards it. It's just another, thing that really highlights for us how talking about this is so important. Obviously, everybody wants their students to get across, cross that stage, right? Get that degree. We want that to happen. It would also be a mistake to assume that one size fits all. So that's the challenge within this program, is to sort of make it work for as many of our students as possible. There are some cases where students can interrupt. There's hardship cases. Of course, there's approved leave of absence, all of that. And I think, again, moving forward, because we know that now, those have to be real. It can't just be, yeah, that's right, I left because of X, Y, Z. It has to be, decided on. And again, as really part of your academic plan, where you say, I have to step away for the semester. However, I'm coming back, and here's my plan to handle that. I'm going to have a baby, so I'll be back next fall, or whatever that might be. I like to use that rather than to say there was something bad that happened. So a baby's good, right? So just to give you an idea of the different configurations of students, and this added to the complexity, again, because it was not just dealing with new students. These were all of the, I know you can't read the little writing, but I can tell you that this was what we really needed to do, to look at every single student. There were over 90,000 students who applied for this program. So we had, at last count in the fall, about 93,000, 93 something. And then we had, I probably have that number right here, yeah. And then we had about another 3 something for the spring, so maybe another about 4,000. So we really were pushing about 100,000. And about 50,000 had to be reviewed for credits by your campuses. You guys did that, which is phenomenal. It really is incredible when I think about what everybody did and how it was really moved forward. So you can imagine, because you know what your systems are like at your campus, so you're thinking, okay. So when we were looking at this and approaching this, we would have preferred to be able to just say, okay, we're going to do the credit review at the campus level. We're going to maintain that. However, we were not allowed to do that. We were asked to submit all of the credit data for all of the students. So whenever we did a review, then we had to take that data and put it into a record layout and then get it onto HESC. That was probably the biggest challenge, because what it is it's a different mindset. In the past, for other state programs, for federal programs of financial aid, what we do is we maintain an enormous amount of information at the campus level, and then we do the review, and then we submit information, but not all the credits. So what happened was campuses had credits in different places, or they didn't have credits. So a student who transfers. So the challenges that were identified pretty quickly were our transfer students. So even a student who was transferring between SUNY campuses, it's not that easy. We all know we're not all on the same system. So it's not that I can say I'm at Cortland, I can access Adirondack information. Can't do it. So when I'm asked about that, well, how is this information shared? It's shared exactly how it would be shared if you got a call from a college in California. You're going to send the same information. We're talking about, a college transcript. The other thing that was a very big learning curve, I think, for the folks at the Higher Ed Services Corporation was that they could not review. They were thinking they're going to be looking at transcripts. It was like, oh, no. Our campuses review the transcripts. Our campuses are the ones who decide whether they're accepting credit. Is that credit going to be accepted for that student? Is that credit going to be going towards their approved program of study, which means then they'll be moving through their program? So it just became this big, complex process. We also had this opportunity for our continuing students to make up credits over the summer. Again, makes sense. If you didn't know that you needed to earn 30 credits in 1 year, so you earned, you were just shy of 3 credits, let's say. So you wanted to take that credit over the summer. However, we have campuses who offer summer sessions right up until the end of August, nearly the very end. So what we had to do was to look at the big picture and say, we can't say by August 20th or August 15th how many students are eligible or not. So that deadline kept getting pushed and pushed, and we ultimately were able to push it to the end of the semester for getting those transcripts and getting information from summer classes, or for summer classes for transfer credits. The other one was study abroad. So we had to learn all of this because we didn't know. We were advocating for appropriate deadlines based on what campuses were telling us to say, wait a minute, we can't have a deadline of August 15th. And we'd go back to HESC and say, we can't have a deadline for August 15th because credits, not everybody's done with summer classes. And then the study abroad. Somebody told me that there was a study abroad program in China that it took till almost October to get grades for. So it's all of those things that were so helpful for us to be able to go back and say, we need to broaden this, or we need to open this up a little bit. Some of the other things that we bumped into, we know that non-credit courses didn't did not count and will not count towards the requirement. But we also wanted to make sure that our EOP students were taken care of and our ADA students. So we continue to monitor, to make sure that as the process is unfolding, that these students, are handled appropriately and fairly. One of the things about our EOP students is that many of them will not be eligible for Excelsior because, again, that's a program where students are academically and economically disadvantaged historically. So they generally don't have, or they're generally already getting fully funded for their tuition from other programs. However, if they lose that for some reason, then they would be an Excelsior recipient, possibly. So that is another one thing that I would say is very positive about this program, is that the academic requirements are actually different than what they are for a lot of the other state programs. So as long as a student is making academic progress at your campus, they don't have to do the same, they don't have the same requirements as the tuition assistance program. So in the case of an EOP student who might lose TAP because of not having a high enough GPA based on where they are in their program, that's where Excelsior can pick up. So this is where we're really sort of learning more and more about this program. Our ADA students need to be treated the same as they are for TAP. And with ADA students, sometimes they can take a full load, sometimes they can't. So what we always want is to make sure that they're treated fairly. And we do have some concerns about that with this program, so we're continuing to monitor that, because one of the things we want to make sure is that it's appropriate. If you're able to take a certain number of classes, you shouldn't be penalized for not earning all of those. It needs to be in line with what not only the rules for TAP, but also the rules for other students who receive this. AP, IB, anything that students earn prior to coming to college officially matriculated, those can also be used to meet the credit requirement. Initially, we were told that those credits could only be used towards the 30 credit hour requirement, and they could be banked and used throughout the time that the student is on campus. We recently had a new interpretation from HESC that also allows it to meet the full-time requirement for the semester. It's a little bit odd. So we're working through that right now. We're hoping that that will be a positive thing for our students. The problem that we kind of have with it is that full-time is 12 credits. So you're really not going to be a student who's taking 9 credits, living in the dorms, for example, and considered full-time for the campus. So, however, there are some populations of our students, so some of our students could benefit in that if they're taking classes that are not in their approved program of study, and they can use these to bank it. So we're hoping that it will help, and we're not really sure. Again, this is all the stuff that we're dealing with, and we're really hoping that we will be able to kind of shake that out as we move forward. I think ultimately it's a positive thing. One of the things, because the statute really is about completion, when you have a student who's done such great work before they even come to college, matriculated, I should say, we want to make sure that that's always recognized, and that's not something that is a negative thing in any way, shape, or form. And we have a lot of support for that from the folks who created this program, really. One of the things that people sometimes are a little bit critical of, I do a lot of meetings with other public universities across the country, and one of the things somebody said to me was, it's terrible that New York State is requiring their scholarship recipients to stay in New York State. And I said, well, let me show you the stats of how many actually stay in New York State. I mean, we're really, I'll tell you, it's a non-issue at CUNY because nearly all of their students for like the first year stay in New York State, and then it goes down a little bit as the years go on. And that's the same with New York. We're at like 83% of our students. And so for us, and for those of us that work directly, on this program, that was the least of my worries, frankly. Because I thought, if a student gets a really great job offer and they want to leave the state, go work in California, go to Connecticut, wherever you need to go, you should always do that. Because what happens is, if you leave the state, this is the only time that this scholarship reverts to a loan. So it's interest-free. It's nothing that the campus has to track. it's all on HES to track it. So I'm thinking, it's really not my concern, it's not the first thing people say to me, from campuses, like, what are we gonna do about this? And frankly, part of the reason that we want students to stay in New York State is because they're good citizens, right? We want all these great college grads to stay. So if we can entice them and say, hey, maybe they'll stay and continue to do great things here. So I think one of the things that a lot of the kind of the narrative on the national level is to try to break, say negative things about this program. And so I am a great defender of this program. It's not been easy. It's not been easy for anybody. However, when somebody can get this kind of funding and also come out with a college degree, I mean, it's very difficult to say that's a bad thing. It's more work for everybody. Yep. Somebody asked me and said, what would you say it cost a campus to implement this program? And I said, I wouldn't even know where to begin, because there were so many folks who were involved in this. And I've had the opportunity to meet with so many different people to talk about this program. It's been terrific. From every, on the academic side, the college presidents, registrars, bursars, financial aid. But what I hear from everybody is how everyone is so supportive. People don't complain. The IT people don't complain. They're like got beaten up left and right. People just did it because it was for the students. And so anything that we can bring back and talk to these groups and try to, shed light on some of the areas where it's confusing. And one of them is this residency also, because there's misinformation that's out there. There's this, well, if you're gonna have to repay it. There's a lot of reasons why there's confusion, but I wanna share with you what this looks like. You can get this deferred. So if a student decides to go to graduate school out of state, no worries, just come back. Finish up when you come back. If you lose the scholarship for some reason, let's say it's a really good reason, like your parents, all of a sudden they're making a lot more money, for example. And I always like to show like the positive reason, not something negative, like let's say, everybody got a promotion. No worries, as long as you stay in school, you're meeting your residency requirement while you're in school. So I think those are pretty fair to students, and certainly the treatment of the military, which you can see, there's no concern with that, and frankly, there's really no graduation requirement, which probably sounds funny, but it's implied. The whole idea of the program is to complete your degree. However, if a student doesn't, for whatever reason, there's no harm. It's not that if you don't have that, actual degree in hand, you're gonna get your bill. It's all about the residency piece, okay? So, all right, so I talked a little bit about the applications and why we thought this was a little bit narrow. We did actually release HESC released the application in June of 2017. So if you think about, again, that timeline, so April was, the legislation was passed. May, at the end of May, we had regulations, and then June 7th, we had an application. It was unbelievable. Is anybody here from Fredonia? No? Fredonia played a really big role in this, and I have to always give them props, because Dan Tremuta, who was at the time heading up financial aid, I know he does enrollment and everything, but he was heading up financial aid at the time, and he called me up and said, well, we had some students, we asked if he could test the application for HESC, because HESC said, well, can you have some students test it for us? And so we said, okay, so I called up Dan, because Dan's always great to help, and he had some students who actually sat down and started working with this application that had been released just one day prior to June 7th. So on June 6th, they actually saved the day. And I always say they saved the day for the entire state, because what these individuals did, these students who were all of what, 20 or 21, they saved the day. They saved this multi-million-dollar program because they tore it apart and they said, this isn't gonna work. They said, it's too long, it's too cumbersome, why are you asking it this way? This browser doesn't work, I can't get it on my phone. I mean, it was amazing. And we were able to get them on the line with the folks from HESC and the folks from ITS, and they fixed the application overnight. Now, it wasn't perfect, But we were so proud that for all of New York, because what that meant was SUNY benefited, CUNY benefited, and also the private schools, frankly, benefited because they were able to model the private side of this, the private program, after what our application was. So they really saved the day. And I think, again, that's a proud moment for SUNY because, again, we've got all of our campuses mobilized, and on top of that, we even had students who fixed things for us. So it was terrific. I would say that this is just a quick overview of what happens when a student applies. We definitely had a few bumps in the road with the verifying of credit. So we are aware that that's the sticking point, and I'm sure that's probably where most of you heard that was the heartache. It's one thing to review transcripts online or when you're sitting at, you've got 3 monitors going, and we had people, Herkimer, is anybody here from Herkimer? I got pictures from the staff at Herkimer. They had like 4 offices together sitting with computers helping do the credit verification. And I think that was indicative of what was happening on campuses. We had folks who skipped vacations and lunch and, to really do these things, again, for the students, to set aside other projects to do this. But completing the verification is enough of a job. But then when you have to take all of that information, put it into a specific format, and then get it over to this entity who then changes the record layout, and there's a bug in the system or whatever. So I would say we bumped into all of those things all year. We are hoping and we are advocating very, very strongly for us to be able to maintain those credits at the campus level. And I'm optimistic that we will be able to really get to that point. One of the reasons, it's not just about us, but it is, I think it's unsustainable for HESC to actually take in all of those credits. I mean, frankly, we're the bottom line, right? We're the last house at the end of the block. If you say the student is not eligible, HESC is going to believe you. They know that you have the information. So, I think we're going to be successful there. Hoping. So I mentioned to you too that HESC is going to do all of the tracking for the students, and they're the ones who are getting the service agreement for students. So if there's any concern also that, did the student really understand what they were getting into? This is all part of what HESC is actually good at doing, right? Tell the student, here's what your award is based on the calculation that the campus did, and then on top of that, if you don't meet these requirements moving forward, here are the cases in which it would become a loan. So a service agreement, that's not even really what it is. It's a residency agreement after you leave college. So somebody was calling it a graduation requirement, but again, as I said, you're not really required to graduate technically. So I wanted to just give you a quick flavor of what the calculation would look like. And this is the piece that after all of the credit review is done at your campus and you've said, yep, this student's eligible, this is the point at which we determine, based on the other types of financial aid, just to give you an idea of what the campuses are dealing with. And in many ways, it's pretty complex. This could never take place at any other entity. It has to happen at the campus level. Not everybody understood that completely, and there was a discussion of taking in transcripts at the Higher Ed Services Corporation and taking in financial aid award letters, and it was just time out, we're not doing that. So I think that, again, this collaboration where we said, okay, we want to give you this, reality that you're dealing with almost 100,000 applications. You're not going to review 100,000 transcripts. This is not going to be a program where you've got 200 students, and you can parcel it out. This is a situation where we're talking about, tens of thousands of students on an annual basis. So, where are we now? I wanted to, and I don't know how I'm doing on time, but am I good? Good. And I really haven't given anyone an opportunity to ask questions. I will certainly entertain anything. Oh, thank you. Very good. But I wanted to give you a flavor for where we are. So we said about 100,000 applicants. And we have the lion's share, no question about it. and the majority of those are at our state-operated campuses. And I can give you a little bit of a flavor of that also. We have about that's the kind of the approved number is 17,000. So we have a much higher number of students who are eligible but may not get funding. And the reason why that's important is because they may be able to get funded in the future. So you always want to make sure that if you are eligible, you're applying, you're making sure that you're on, and that is very important. And the reason that's important is because things change. I mentioned that with an EOP student, maybe they lose their eligibility for another program, and then they could get this, can get Excelsior funding. We want to make sure that we know who's eligible. This is a tough thing to explain to people sometimes. I mean, we all work with it, so we understand. But to tell someone, well, the student is eligible, however, they're not getting an award. What? But it's that calculation that we looked at on the previous page that leads us to this, where you could be eligible and funded this year, but not funded next year, and then the following year, because circumstances change, you might be eligible again. So it depends on not only income, but it also depends on your, I wanted to say your income, but what was my other thought on that? Not just your income, financial aid, other financial aid. So in other words, if you're fully funded one year and then something happens and you're not moving forward, your situation could change, and that would obviously change your eligibility for funding, okay? So we are very happy that many of our students we probably have more than 20,000 who are eligible. So maybe like 21,000 or a little bit more than that who might be eligible. And if they're not funded this year, or who are eligible, if they're not funded this year, they might be in a future year. So about, let's see, what is our number? So we have about 3,000 at our community colleges or so. And then the remainder would probably be at our state ops. But again, these are all really rough numbers. You might know what those numbers are roughly for your campus. But right now, one of the big things that happened this past week is that the SECA Center, and many of you work with the SECA Center, for our banner campuses, they have released their programming for the certification of Excelsior. So waiting for that has been a lot for our campuses. There were many who were doing workarounds and sending certifications. But certifying the student at the end of the semester the way we do, we're looking at certifying students for the fall, and we've already completed the spring. Another symptom of the short time frame. Normally we'd have every single aspect of it all ironed out, and when I say we, I would say the Higher Ed Services Corporation would be providing us with all of the tools that we need to do that. So in many ways, this was an example of sort of making changes as we were going along. I would say in that respect, it has, you have to know it's been very successful for that. So I mentioned before that we're not really sure where our impacts will be. Will this have an impact on enrollment? We are looking, hopefully we'll have much more information on this, who got certified, right? The certification for the fall, which is taking place right now, is probably gonna go pretty smoothly. The challenge is gonna be for the spring semester. So let me tell you why. So for the fall semester, it's a little bit of a gimme, right? Out of the gate, if you're eligible and you've registered for the appropriate number of credits in your approved program of study, campuses are gonna be able to certify you. For the spring semester, remember we said, you gotta be looking at this 30 credits for the whole year. So you've got some students who just finished up their semester, and let's say they did 12 and 12, and they've earned 24 credits. So what campuses are doing right now is notifying those students who are not gonna be able to be certified right now. We have to wait and see, did they actually make up those credits over the summer? So as we said before, that's the huge challenge. is identifying who's falling into this category where it might be a little gray, we're not sure. Are you going to be able to take those credits this summer? Will you have the wherewithal, the time, the funding, the desire, right? So, I think that's where advisement is a huge part. And wherever you're sitting, whether you're a traditional advisor, and that's like your actual role at the campus, or whether you're a financial aid officer or someone else who is helping to usher the student through this, it's a crucial thing to make sure that we're advising them that if we take you off and say you're not eligible because you didn't meet that 30, you're out forever. One of the things that this program does not have is a waiver. There's no way to go back and say, okay, you stepped out, now you're going to come back in. That's not great news, unfortunately, for our students, because what we really would love is to be able to say, okay, you got a waiver, just like we do on the TAP program. There's actually 2 kinds of waivers in the TAP program where you can actually say, all right, I didn't make it. However, here's the reason I didn't make it. And there's every expectation that I will be able to succeed. So we're going to give you, it's a gimme, it's a mulligan, it's another chance for the student. There aren't those chances with Excelsior. So if somebody loses their eligibility, the problem right now, today, the way it's written, is that a student who cannot be certified for spring, we are required by law to defer the tuition, which means you might have to bill that student at the end of the summer. I can assure you that this is something that is not being taken lightly. All of our campuses, if you haven't been directly involved in that, I know everyone is working very diligently to advise students and to say to them, okay, we don't want to send you a bill, whether it's $2,200 or, let's say you're a community college, I don't want it to be, nobody wants that, right? And for a program that is about student success, that's something that will create a huge barrier for our students to continue. Because if I get billed at the end of the semester and I've already registered in the fall, I'm planning on coming back, how do I get past that balance? So that's the challenge right now. And we're trying to get kind of our arms around collectively what those numbers look like. So each campus has it, and I have one campus that has 20 students. I have another one that has 15. So, how we advise students today is very important. And what can we do to help them? I mean, if a student doesn't have funding for that, maybe they're not going to be able to do it. We just want to make sure we have we give them every opportunity to succeed with that. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, yep.
Then they could be eligible in the future. If they don't meet their progress towards their degree, then they are out through. Is that right?
Right. So, and that's why from year to year. Now, students who have applied for this year don't have to do a full application in the future. They just have to apply for payment. It's just a different way of applying. And it's all within that same realm for them, electronically. However, because a student could be, so yes, and it is confusing because I could be eligible this year, but I got a ton of financial aid. Let's say I got all kinds of private scholarships or something this year. But then next year, I apply for payment, and it's great. I might be, I could get an Excelsior award. It's not great that I lost the other, but maybe I can get Excelsior. So that's where the eligibility is. However, within that, they're always going to be looking at income. So there's always going to be that income verification on an annual basis. Now, I think I mentioned it, but you guys also probably know that we went from 100,000 annual up to 110, and then next year it's going to be 125. So it just does open up a little bit. If you were ineligible because of income for this year, but next year you make it because it's broader, as long as you're making progress, you're going to be okay, and you're continuously enrolled. So if you just think about it that way, you always go back to those general requirements. Okay, are you good with that? I know it's not really an easy program necessarily. Yes?
This has been a great presentation. Will your slides be available?
Yes, absolutely.
And then I had some other questions too. With
I'm assuming that it's 30 credits a year of degree applicable credits.
Correct.
And so there are many times when a student can't take the next course because the college doesn't have a prereq available for registration. It's full. Nothing to do with the student's preference. So if the college doesn't have the prereq course available for the student, then the student loses eligibility.
It's possible they could, and that is very unfortunate. I'm right with you on how terrible that is. I will say, one of the things that, the best we can do at this point, and we're always advocating that, where we want more flexibility because of the sequencing. It's all well and good to say that everybody's going to move just swiftly through their program and that everything's going to just line up perfectly, and it just doesn't. There are some snags like that, and it's unfortunate because there could be a student caught in that. When asked about that, one of the things that I think brought to us the importance of doing the cross-registration policy as well as the financial aid consortium, because we needed to tighten that up, because those are the tools that our campuses and our students need to say, okay, maybe I can't get it here, but can I get it someplace else? And that's really one of the reasons why we're doing that and pushing that so vehemently, to say, just try it, or try an online course so that you don't lose out, because we're not going to have a lot of opportunities to get you back in. So.
I'm not sure I followed you before about ineligibility because of other financial aid.
Okay.
So if a student 1 year has enough financial aid to take care of that person, but next year doesn't have that financial aid, has he become ineligible now because he started Excelsior his freshman year, spring semester freshman, he got enough financial aid to not be eligible for Excelsior. Next fall, he needs Excelsior again.
Right.
Has he lost eligibility to?
Not as long as he meets all the general requirements. So he still has to do that. So you want to say to the student, you're eligible based on this criteria, but the financial aid piece didn't work out for you this year. So a really good example is the TAP and Pell, right? If a student has TAP and Pell. But remember, they're all different academic requirements for the federal program, the state program, and then for Excelsior. So I know nobody wants to work in financial aid anymore. I hear my colleagues say I'm retiring, because you have to keep track of all of that. And it is like a little bit of a puzzle. So if a student, let's say, loses their eligibility for the tuition assistance program, the state grant program, and it's because they're not making progress on that program, they could potentially get Excelsior, because the program requirements are actually, in a lot of cases, the academic requirements are lower. But again, not a solid rule, but that's the complexity of it. Does that make sense?
That
Okay.
answers perfectly, which leads me,
Keep going.
thank you. I'm thinking about faculty who are, suppose you have, a student has an assigned faculty
Yes.
who probably isn't as knowledgeable about this as the financial aid officer on campus or the academic advisement officer. So I am very concerned about the advisement of the student. If it could somehow be, put into banner, tactile, Excelsior,
I know. Yeah.
if it isn't, and maybe it can't be, then what is your advice about
Advising, I know.
all of our students?
It is not easy. I will tell you a couple things that we've done, and a couple good things that have come to pass this year. One is the collaboration piece, which was amazing. I would say, though, I learned personally how very different. I knew our campuses were different. I knew our banner campuses were different. However, I could have never imagined how very different, and that is amazing. So it is just no one answer for every campus. However, that is the same with academic advisement. So some campuses have assigned, some campuses have a director of advisement, sometimes it's the chairperson of the department, sometimes, it's all different. So what we did to try to help with that was working with Grace, Grace Wong, our interim provost. I know we have a new provost. I'm a big Grace fan, and I understand she was here. I don't know if you guys saw her speak. Isn't she amazing? And I'm excited about our new provost coming in, and I think, my goodness, if he's going to work with Grace, and we're going to be in great shape. But I can say Grace really helped us move this forward a lot, and we're going to continue it because there's two things that happened that were really big. One was we did have conversations with the chief academic officers about this, and I know that Grace did. One of the other things that we did was we did a webinar that was attended, and we had participants from all over SUNY, and we had a lot of our academic folks involved in that, and we talked about all of these issues. We can't, all we can do is say, hey, are you listening, But the other thing that happened in March, which was fantastic, was spearheaded by a small group of really dedicated academic folks, including representatives from all over the system. But Joanne Malatesta from University of Albany, Joanne probably. I don't know if you've all met her, she's phenomenal. Joanne brought together a group and created this academic network. What was it called? I have all the forms, but anyway, we had over 300 academic folks at SUNY Albany in March to talk about Excelsior and all kinds of other issues. But Excelsior was a really hot topic, and there were people from all kinds of different offices, so it was very, very interesting. 59 campuses were represented, and we are not stopping there. We really want to get everybody really motivated and sort of mobilized to work together to say, it's not like when I started in financial aid 100 years ago where our financial aid recipients were a very small number of our students, right? I mean, it might have been, at that time, I want to say, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering it correctly, but it was like 25% maybe. We have campuses now that have 85, 90% of their student population are receiving some sort of financial aid. So it's pretty phenomenal. So we really can't ignore that anymore. We really want to always make sure, and this is the balance, to make sure that it's academic, obviously, everything, they have to be advised academically appropriate and sound, right? I don't want to say that that's not important. It's so important, but it's also important that they're there the next semester in that seat. So what we try to impress upon our academic folks is just, again, don't expect you to be an expert, but if you just know, this is your academic advice. But now, take this, it's so important, now go find out what will happen if you do this, like drop this class, and I've had people argue with me, I would never advise a student, to do something just for money, and I'm like, the problem is, if they're not there, then they're not succeeding. So you have this whole debate about that importance of that. So even just telling them, just go check. I don't even need to know if you're a financial aid recipient. I don't need to know if you're Excelsior, but if you are, this may impact you being able to move forward and be in that seat next semester. So I think this collaboration is so important, and we don't want to end it there, right? Am I done?
Well, I do not.
Oh.
I was just going to ask a question.
Please.
I have a question about the whole tuition freezing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have a couple different questions.
Okay.
But one is, if a student, a lot of times when you first get out of high school, you get a lot of
Thank you.
financial aid at like one time.
Yes,
Like
right.
beginning,
$200 from the Rotary, and right.
So you may be eligible, but you don't qualify, or you don't get certified, whatever.
Mhm.
Then, so you go in and out of being like, you have one of your parents start making more money,
Mhm.
but then you come back and being eligible. Are you still frozen at that entry level tuition?
Good question. And the answer to that is the only time your tuition is frozen is when you're receiving the award. So for that semester. So if and it comes down to the whole tuition liability piece also, right? So if I start the semester and I'm a recipient of funding, then that's different than eligible. So an eligible student could actually, they're eligible, but if they're not receiving funding, they're going to pay the higher tuition. And I will say, there's not a lot of written guidance that we want, I'm a financial aid person, I want volumes of things written about this program. There is a lot of information on our SUNY website. Most of the campuses have a lot of information. But HESC is another really good resource. They have Q&As, which we try to kind of, help them to keep that updated and make sure that it's relevant, These are exactly the questions about billing, because billing is huge. And again, as I said earlier, you could have two students sitting right next to each other. One is eligible for Excelsior, but not funded, who's paying current tuition, sitting next to a student who's funded, who's paying 16, 17 tuition. So the only time that changes is if you lose your eligibility or you're not funded that semester. Okay, does that make sense? Okay.
Now, if you go through the whole program, with the frozen tuition, you're getting Excelsior all the way along, you graduate, you decide to move out of state. And you get the bill. Like, you start paying on that 10-year loan.
Right.
You still maintain that frozen tuition the whole time.
Yes, it's only what you were funded. So if you have to repay it,
You're just repaying it. They're not take that off and charge you more.
no, they're not going to do that. And they're not going to charge you interest, which is nice. I mean, if you have to repay it, to pay it without interest is a good deal.
And
So,
I have one last.
yes, please. Good
Have
questions.
you noticed a trend of students who may have historically chosen to go to community college and then 2 years of four-year college, choosing to go straight into four-year college because this is available?
I have not seen that, because I don't have data. I have heard that anecdotally, but I have nothing to prove it or disprove it. It is something we will absolutely be looking at when we have data. That's a tough one, though, to measure, right?
People do that as a cost saver.
Yes,
Especially
yes,
when they're contacts.
absolutely.
You can go from one and enter as a junior.
Exactly. And that was the thought when we first saw the spike in tuition, or pardon me, not tuition, the spike in applications for admission, right? So we were, what is it, So like all of a sudden it was like 8 or 9% more, than what we would normally see on these days. But we don't have that yet. Anecdotally, I've heard people say that. And it seems like that's a possibility. We just don't have it yet. So, what other questions? Did you guys work on Excelsior? Y'all worked on it? No? You were? Yeah? It's really been quite a year. I can say I've had an amazing time working on it, and I can tell you that it's very unique. New York has really, once again, we have done something that is very different and very unique. And so it's a challenge, but I have to say again, campuses were awesome on this. And people think I just mean financial aid people because that's kind of my team, but I got to tell you, I met some amazing, amazing people even college presidents who were so engaged in these discussions. So it's been really amazing. But I hope that if you have any questions, I'm going to be here. Obviously, everybody probably is ready to head on home for the long weekend. But certainly, I also have my business cards, or you guys can email me. Let me know if there's anything else that comes up that you're concerned or you have a question about. And we'll keep plugging along. And as soon as we have some data, that's when we're going to really be rolling up our sleeves and taking a look at these students. Yes.
Excelsior program will continue quite a while?
Yeah, we really hope so. Certainly, since it's a program that needs to be funded with an appropriation every year. We have every reason to believe it will continue, and we hope it will. So we'll see. We'll definitely see. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.